Sarah Martinez wiped down the greasy counter for the 20th time that night, her tired eyes watching the clock tick past midnight. The all-night diner where she worked sat on the edge of town, catching truckers and late-shift workers who needed cheap coffee and cheaper food. At 23, she had been working double shifts for 2 years, barely scraping together enough money to pay rent on her tiny apartment above the auto shop. The rain hammered against the windows like angry fists, and thunder rolled across the empty parking lot. Sarah had sent the cook home early since no customers had come in for hours. She was alone, counting the meager tips from her shift when she heard it, a sound that made her blood freeze. It was crying. Not human crying, but something else. Something that sounded scared and hurt and completely alone. Sarah grabbed the heavy flashlight from behind the counter and stepped outside into the storm. The rain soaked through her uniform in seconds, but she pushed forward toward the dumpster where the sound seemed to come from. Her heart pounded as she aimed the light into the darkness. There, tucked between 2 garbage bags, was something that shouldn't exist. The creature was no bigger than a house cat, covered in what looked like scales that shimmered even in the dim light. It had wings, actual wings, folded against its trembling body. Its head was reptilian but somehow intelligent, with large eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like mirrors. When it saw her, it made a sound that was part whimper, part chirp. Sarah had seen enough nature documentaries to recognize what this looked like, even though it was impossible. It looked like a baby dragon, but dragons weren't real. They couldn't be real. The little creature tried to crawl deeper into the garbage, but it was clearly hurt. One of its wings hung at an odd angle, and there was a gash along its side that oozed something that wasn't quite blood. It was silver and seemed to glow faintly. Sarah looked around the empty parking lot. No one was coming. No one would find this thing until morning, and by then it might be dead. She couldn't call the police. Who would believe her? She couldn't call animal control. What would they do with something like this? The creature made another pitiful sound, and something in Sarah's chest cracked open. She had always been the type of person who rescued stray cats and fed hungry dogs. Her mother used to say she had too big a heart for her own good. "Okay, little guy," she whispered, reaching out slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you." The creature flinched but didn't try to bite when she carefully scooped it up in an old towel from the diner. It was surprisingly warm, and she could feel its rapid heartbeat through the fabric. Up close, she could see that its scales were actually beautiful, dark blue with hints of purple that caught the light. Sarah carried it inside and set it gently on the counter. The creature's eyes never left her face, and there was something in that gaze that seemed almost human, almost understanding. "What are you?" she asked softly. The creature tilted its head, and for a crazy moment, Sarah thought it was trying to answer. She knew she should probably take it to a veterinarian, but it was past midnight and she had exactly $37 in her purse. Besides, what vet would know how to treat a dragon, if that's what this even was? Looking at the injured wing and the cut on its side, Sarah did what she could with the first aid kit from the diner. The creature held perfectly still while she cleaned its wounds, as if it understood she was trying to help. When she wrapped its wing gently against its body, it made a sound that might have been gratitude. "You must be hungry," Sarah said, though she had no idea what dragons ate. Did they eat meat? Plants? People? She offered it some leftover chicken from the kitchen, breaking it into tiny pieces. The creature sniffed it carefully, then ate with delicate bites. It seemed to prefer the skin, ignoring the meat itself. As the creature ate, Sarah found herself talking to it. She told it about her job, about how she was saving money to go back to school someday, about how lonely it got working nights in an empty diner. The creature listened, occasionally making small chirping sounds as if it was part of the conversation. When she offered it water in a small bowl, it drank gratefully. Then, to her amazement, it curled up on the towel and fell asleep, its chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Sarah stared at the sleeping creature and realized her life had just changed completely. She couldn't leave it here and she couldn't abandon it. But how do you hide a dragon? How do you care for something that wasn't supposed to exist? She thought about her tiny apartment, about her landlord who barely tolerated her and definitely wouldn't tolerate pets. She thought about her job, about the customers who might see the creature. She thought about money, about food, about all the impossible problems that came with trying to raise something that no human had ever raised before. But as she watched the little dragon sleep, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt needed. This creature, Whatever it was, had been abandoned just like she had been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to care about her. Maybe they could take care of each other. I guess you're coming home with me, she whispered. The dragon's ear twitched, but it didn't wake up. Sarah finished closing the diner, counting the register and cleaning the kitchen with the dragon sleeping peacefully on the counter beside her. When it was time to leave, she wrapped it carefully in the towel and carried it to her beat-up car. As she drove through the empty streets toward her apartment, Sarah couldn't help but smile despite everything. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new challenges she couldn't even imagine yet. But tonight she had saved a life. Tonight she wasn't alone. The dragon stirred in the towel beside her and she reached over to gently stroke its head. Its scales were softer than they looked. "Don't worry, little guy," she said. "We'll figure this out together." 3 weeks had passed since Sarah found the dragon, and her life had become a careful dance of secrecy and exhaustion. She had named him Ember because of the way his scales seemed to glow in certain light, and because sometimes she swore she could see tiny sparks in his breath when he was excited. Her studio apartment above the auto shop was barely big enough for one person, let alone a growing dragon. Ember had doubled in size since she found him, now about as big as a small dog. His wing had healed perfectly, though he hadn't tried to fly yet. The silver wound had closed without leaving a scar, which amazed Sarah every time she looked at where it used to be. The biggest challenge was keeping him hidden. Mr. Kowalski, who owned the auto shop below, was a nice enough man, but he was also nosy and had strong opinions about tenants who caused trouble. Sarah had invested in thick curtains and played music during the day to cover any sounds Ember might make. Ember was surprisingly quiet most of the time, but he was also incredibly intelligent. Sarah had initially worried about leaving him alone while she worked, but he seemed to understand that he needed to stay hidden. She would come home to find him exactly where she left him, though sometimes her books were in different places, as if he had been looking at them. The food situation was becoming a problem. Sarah had experimented with different things, and Ember seemed to prefer meat but only the fatty parts. He loved bacon skin, chicken fat, and the marrow from bones. The butcher at the grocery store had started giving her strange looks when she came in asking for soup bones and fat trimmings every few days. Money was tighter than ever. Feeding Ember cost almost as much as feeding herself, and she had already started skipping meals to make sure he had enough. Her tips at the diner weren't great to begin with, and she couldn't afford veterinary bills if Ember got sick. She tried not to think about what she would do if he kept growing. Her apartment was already feeling cramped, and she had noticed that Ember watched the window with increasing interest, as if he knew there was a whole world outside that he had never seen. The loneliness was both better and worse. Better because she wasn't coming home to an empty apartment anymore. Ember always greeted her with excited chirps and would curl up next to her while she ate dinner. Worse because she couldn't tell anyone about him. She found herself making excuses when her coworkers asked why she looked so tired, why she never went out anymore. Lisa, the night cook at the diner, had started asking questions. "You look like you haven't slept in weeks, girl. You got a secret boyfriend or something?" Sarah had laughed it off, but she could see the concern in Lisa's eyes. Lisa was the closest thing Sarah had to a friend, and it hurt to lie to her. The worst part was not knowing what Ember really was or what he needed. She had searched the internet for hours, but everything about dragons was fantasy and mythology. There was no guide for caring for a real one. She was making it up as she went along, hoping she wasn't making terrible mistakes. Ember was clearly not just an animal. He watched television with interest, tilting his head at certain sounds. He had figured out how to open the refrigerator, though he was good about only taking things Sarah had shown him were okay to eat. Sometimes she caught him staring at her books and she swore he was trying to understand the words. One evening, Sarah came home from a particularly bad shift at the diner. She had spilled coffee on a customer, dropped a plate, and earned only $12 in tips for 8 hours of work. She was exhausted, frustrated, and wondering how much longer she could keep this up. Ember must have sensed her mood because instead of his usual excited greeting, he approached her slowly and rested his head against her leg. The gesture was so human, so full of understanding that Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "I don't know what I'm doing, Ember," she whispered, sinking onto her couch. "I don't know if I'm taking care of you right. I don't know how long I can afford to feed both of us. I don't know anything." Ember climbed onto the couch beside her and did something he had never done before. He wrapped his wings around her arm like a hug. His scales were warm against her skin, and she could feel the steady rhythm of his breathing. In that moment, Sarah realized that maybe she didn't need to have all the answers. Maybe love and determination were enough for now. Maybe they would figure it out together one day at a time. She scratched behind Ember's ears, and he made a contented rumbling sound deep in his chest. It reminded her of a cat's purr, but deeper and more musical. "We're a team, aren't we?" she said. "Whatever happens, we stick together." Ember looked up at her with those intelligent eyes, and Sarah could have sworn he nodded. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find Ember sitting by the window, his nose pressed against the glass. His wings were slightly spread, and he was making soft sounds she had never heard before. Following his gaze, Sarah saw something that made her heart skip a beat. There were birds outside, a whole flock of them, flying in formation across the morning sky. Ember was watching them with intense focus, and for the first time, Sarah realized he was watching them fly. "Do you want to fly, little guy?" she asked softly. Ember turned to look at her, then back at the window. He spread his wings wider, and Sarah could see how much stronger they had grown. The membrane between the wing bones was nearly transparent, and she could see delicate patterns of veins running through it. Sarah felt a pang of guilt. She was keeping him cooped up in a tiny apartment, and he was growing bigger every day. How long before he became too big for this space? How long before his need to fly became stronger than his bond with her? She pushed those thoughts away. Today was enough to worry about today. Tonight she would work another shift at the diner, and tomorrow they would face whatever came next. But as she got ready for work, Sarah couldn't shake the image of Ember watching the sky with such longing. She was giving him everything she could, but was everything she could give enough for a creature that was meant to soar? 6 months had changed everything. Ember was now the size of a medium dog. His scales had deepened to a rich navy blue with silver edges, and his intelligence had grown in ways that sometimes frightened Sarah. He understood simple commands, responded to his name, and had even learned to turn the television on and off by himself. More concerning was that he had started making sounds that weren't quite animal sounds anymore. Sometimes Sarah caught him making noises that sounded almost like words, though she couldn't understand what he might be trying to say. The apartment had become impossible. Sarah had moved all her furniture against the walls to give Ember more space, but he could barely spread his wings fully without hitting something. She had started taking him out late at night, wrapped in a large blanket, to the abandoned lot behind the auto shop where he could stretch and move freely. These midnight excursions had become the highlight of both their days. Ember would run circles around the lot, his wings spread wide, practicing what looked like flying motions even though he never left the ground. Sarah would sit on an old crate and watch him, marveling at his grace and beauty. During these outings, Ember had begun showing her things that made her question everything she thought she knew about dragons. He could make the temperature around him change, not dramatically but noticeably. On cold nights, sitting near him was like sitting next to a gentle heater. When it rained, the water seemed to slide off his scales without getting him wet. Most remarkably, he had started to glow. It was subtle at first, just a faint luminescence that Sarah thought might be her imagination. But now, when he was happy or excited, his scales would emit a soft blue light that was unmistakably real. The glowing had led to a close call the previous week. Mrs. Chen, who lived in the apartment across the alley, had knocked on Sarah's door asking about strange lights she had seen through the windows. Sarah had claimed she was trying out new LED decorations for her room, but she could tell Mrs. Chen wasn't entirely convinced. Work at the diner had become increasingly difficult. Sarah was exhausted from the stress of hiding Ember, and she had started making mistakes. She had forgotten orders, mixed up tables, and twice had fallen asleep standing up while wiping down counters. Lisa had finally cornered her in the break room. "Sarah, honey, you need to tell me what's going on. You look like you haven't had a full night's sleep in months. Are you sick? Are you in some kind of trouble?" Sarah had wanted so badly to tell her the truth, but how could she? "I'm fine, Lisa, just tired." "This isn't tired, this is exhausted. This is running yourself into the ground. You're going to collapse if you keep this up." Lisa's voice was gentle but firm. "Whatever it is, you don't have to handle it alone." The kindness in Lisa's voice had almost broken Sarah's resolve. She had come so close to telling her everything, but then she imagined trying to explain Ember. Imagined the disbelief, the questions, the possibility that someone might take him away. The financial pressure was crushing. Ember's appetite had grown with his size, And the specialty foods he seemed to need were expensive. Sarah had sold everything valuable she owned. Her grandmother's jewelry, her laptop, even her winter coat. She was behind on rent, and Mr. Kowalski had started leaving pointed notes about payment schedules. But the bond between her and Ember had grown stronger too. He seemed to sense her moods and would comfort her when she was stressed. When she had food poisoning last month, he had stayed by her side for 3 days, bringing her water and refusing to leave her alone. He had even somehow managed to bring her the phone when she was too sick to get up. Ember's attempts at communication were becoming more sophisticated. He had started arranging objects in patterns that seemed meaningful, though Sarah couldn't decode them. He would line up her books in specific orders or arrange his food in shapes before eating it. One night, while they were in the lot behind the shop, Ember had done something that changed everything. Sarah was sitting on her usual crate, watching him practice his wing movements, when he suddenly stopped and looked directly at her. Then, clear as day, he spoke. "Sarah." It wasn't quite human speech, there was a musical quality to it, like wind chimes mixed with whispers, but it was unmistakably her name. Sarah had frozen, wondering if she had imagined it, but Ember stepped closer and repeated it. "Sarah," tears had filled her eyes. "You can talk." Ember tilted his head, studying her face. Then, with obvious effort, he said, "Thank you." Those 2 words had changed everything Sarah thought she knew about their relationship. Ember wasn't just an intelligent animal she was caring for. He was someone who understood what she had done for him, someone who was grateful, someone who had chosen to trust her with his first words. Since that night, Ember had been practicing speech constantly. His vocabulary was growing daily, though he seemed to choose his words carefully as if each one required significant effort. "Hungry," he would say when he wanted food, "outside" when he wanted to go to the lot. Sarah sad when he noticed her crying over bills or exhaustion, but with his growing intelligence came new problems. Ember was clearly becoming restless. He spent more time at the window, and Sarah had caught him trying to figure out how to open it. He was growing too large for their nighttime outings to be enough exercise, and he had started asking questions she couldn't answer. Where other dragons? He had asked the previous night, the words coming out slowly but clearly. Sarah had felt her heart break a little. "I don't know, Ember. I don't know if there are other dragons. Where I come from?" That was the question that haunted Sarah. Where had he come from? Who had abandoned him? Was he alone in the world? Or were there others like him somewhere? The thought of him being the only one of his kind made her chest tight with sadness. As Sarah watched Ember grow stronger and smarter every day, she realized their time together might be limited. How long before he outgrew her small apartment completely? How long before his need for answers about his origins became stronger than his attachment to her? She pushed those thoughts away as she did every night, focusing instead on the miracle of right now. Ember was safe, he was fed, he was loved. For now, that had to be enough. But deep down, Sarah knew that eventually she would have to make an impossible choice between keeping him hidden and letting him find out where he truly belonged. The crisis began on a Tuesday morning when Sarah overslept. She had been working triple shifts at the diner to pay for Ember's increasing food needs and had collapsed into bed at dawn without setting her alarm. By the time she woke up, the sun was high and she could hear Mr. Kowalski banging around in the auto shop below. More concerning was the sound of Ember in distress. Sarah bolted upright to find him pressed against the window, wings spread in agitation, making urgent chirping sounds. Following his gaze, she saw what had upset him. A small crowd had gathered in the alley, pointing up at her window and talking excitedly. Mrs. Chen was there, along with 2 teenagers with phones in their hands, and Mr. Rodriguez from the corner store. They were all looking directly at her apartment. Sarah's blood turned to ice. In her exhaustion, she had forgotten to close the blackout curtains the night before. Ember's natural glow, combined with the morning sunlight hitting his scales, must have created quite a display. "They saw you," Sarah whispered, her heart hammering. "Bad?" Ember asked, his vocabulary still limited but his understanding of her tone perfect. "Very bad." Sarah grabbed her phone and called in sick to the diner, knowing she couldn't leave Ember alone now. She spent the next hour watching from behind the curtains as people came and went from the alley, all of them looking up at her window and talking. By noon, she could see someone with a professional camera setting up across the street. The knock on her door came at 2 in the afternoon. Sarah had been expecting it, but it still made her stomach drop to her feet. "Miss Martinez." The voice was professional, authoritative. "This is Officer Williams with Animal Control. We need to speak with you." Sarah looked at Ember, who was hiding in the bathroom as she had trained him to do when people came to the door. "Just a minute." She opened the door just wide enough to slip out into the hallway, closing it firmly behind her. Officer Williams was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes but a no-nonsense expression. "We've had reports of an unusual animal in this building," she said. "Large, possibly exotic, definitely not legal to keep as a pet in this area." "I don't know what you mean," Sarah said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than it felt. "Miss Martinez, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen every kind of illegal pet you can imagine. Snakes, big cats, even a kangaroo once. But the descriptions I'm getting today?" She paused, studying Sarah's face. "They're saying it glows. They're saying it looks like a dragon." Sarah's mouth went dry. "That's ridiculous, is it?" Officer Williams stepped closer and Sarah could smell coffee on her breath. "Because I also got a call from Dr. Emily Foster at the university. She's a cryptozoologist and she's very interested in taking a look at whatever you've got in there." The word cryptozoologist made Sarah's skin crawl. Scientist meant tests, meant cages, meant Ember being taken away and studied like a lab rat. "I don't have any illegal animals," Sarah said firmly. Officer Williams sighed. "Look, I like you. You work hard, you don't cause trouble. Your neighbors mostly speak well of you. But I've got a warrant here." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I can do this the easy way or the hard way, but I'm going to search this apartment." Behind the door, Sarah heard a soft thump, then silence. Ember was listening. Can I have 5 minutes to get dressed?" Sarah asked, desperate for time to think. "5 minutes," Officer Williams agreed. "But I'm staying right here." Sarah slipped back inside and found Ember pressed against the bathroom door, his eyes wide with understanding. He might not know the word warrant, but he clearly understood that their life together was about to end. "Hide," Sarah whispered urgently. "You have to hide, and no matter what happens, don't come out." "Sarah in trouble because of me?" Ember's voice was barely a whisper, but the guilt in it broke her heart. "No," she said firmly. "This isn't your fault. None of this is your fault." But even as she said it, Sarah knew hiding wouldn't work. Her apartment was too small and Ember was too big. There was nowhere he could go that wouldn't be found in a thorough search. Then Ember did something that amazed her. He closed his eyes and concentrated, and slowly his glow began to fade. His scales darkened until they were almost black, and he seemed to shrink in on himself. "Camouflage," he said simply. Sarah stared. In the dim light of the bathroom, with his scales dark and his body compressed, he looked like a large dog. Not a normal dog, but definitely not obviously a dragon either. A desperate plan formed in Sarah's mind. When she opened the door again, Officer Williams came in with 2 assistants carrying nets and restraint equipment. Sarah's heart sank at the sight of the nets, but she forced herself to stay calm. "This is a small space," Officer Williams noted, looking around. "Shouldn't take long." They searched methodically, checking closets, under the bed, behind furniture. When they reached the bathroom door, Sarah held her breath. Officer Williams opened it and stepped inside. Ember sat perfectly still in the far corner, looking as much like a large dark-colored dog as possible. "That your dog?" she asked. "Yes," Sarah said, praying her voice wouldn't shake. "His name is Bruno. He's a mixed breed." Officer Williams crouched down, studying Ember carefully. Sarah's heart hammered as Ember submitted to the examination, even allowing the woman to touch his head. "Weird-looking dog," she said finally. "What kind of mix?" "Greyhound and Rottweiler," Sarah improvised. Officer Williams stood up, brushing off her knees. "Well, he's definitely unusual looking, but he's clearly just a dog. Big, but not illegally big." The search continued through the rest of the apartment, but found nothing. When they were preparing to leave, Officer Williams turned back to Sarah. "The people outside were pretty insistent about what they saw," she said. "You sure there's nothing you want to tell me?" Sarah shook her head. "Just Bruno. Maybe the morning light made him look strange through the window." Officer Williams studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay, but Miss Martinez, if you were hiding something exotic, something dangerous, it wouldn't be safe for you or the animal. These kinds of creatures need specialized care." "I understand," Sarah said. After they left, Sarah collapsed against the door and slid to the floor. Ember emerged from the bathroom. his scales slowly returning to their normal blue color. "Good job hiding," Sarah said. But even as she praised him, she realized how close they had come to losing everything. Ember approached her slowly and rested his head in her lap. Sarah scared. "Yeah," she admitted. "I was terrified. They take me away?" Sarah stroked his head, feeling the warm smoothness of his scales. "Not today. But Ember, we can't stay here anymore. Too many people saw you. It's not safe. Where we go?" That was the question Sarah had been dreading. She had no family, no friends who could hide them, no money to run away to somewhere safe. But looking into Ember's trusting eyes, she knew she would figure something out. She had to. They had come too far together to give up now. Sarah had always known Ember was special, but it wasn't until they were forced to leave their apartment that she discovered just how extraordinary he really was. They had been living in Sarah's beat-up Honda Civic for 3 weeks, moving from parking lot to parking lot, staying one step ahead of the rumors that seemed to follow them wherever they went. Sarah had lost her job at the diner when she stopped showing up regularly, and their money was running dangerously low. It was during one of these desperate nights, parked behind an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, that everything changed. Sarah had been crying quietly, thinking Ember was asleep in the back seat, when she felt his wing wrap gently around her shoulder. She turned to find him watching her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul. "Sarah hurts," he said softly. His speech had improved dramatically over the past few weeks, as if stress and constant conversation had accelerated his learning. "I'm scared, Ember," she admitted. "I don't know what we're going to do. We're almost out of money, out of food. I can't take care of you properly living in a car." Ember was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Then he said something that changed everything. "I know what I am now." Sarah turned fully to face him. "What do you mean?" "I remember," Ember said carefully, each word chosen with precision. "Not everything, but pieces. I am not from this world, Sarah. I am from place far away among stars." Sarah's breath caught. "You mean you're an alien?" "Yes, my people call ourselves Draconi. We are explorers, scientists. I was sent here as infant to study this world, but ship was damaged. Emergency pod brought me to surface, but landing was hard. My guardians," Ember's scales dimmed slightly, "I think they did not survive crash." The weight of this revelation settled over Sarah like a blanket. An alien. Ember was an extraterrestrial being, possibly the only one of his kind on Earth. "How do you know all this?" she asked. "Memories come back as I grow stronger. And—" Ember hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I have abilities that are awakening." As if to demonstrate, Ember focused on a crumpled fast food wrapper on the floor of the car. Sarah watched in amazement as the wrapper began to glow with a soft blue light, then slowly rose into the air without anyone touching it. "Telekinesis," Ember said, the scientific term sounding strange in his musical voice, "is basic ability for my people. I have others too." Sarah stared as the wrapper danced through the air, rotating and spinning at Ember's will. "What other abilities?" "I can sense emotions, read simple thoughts sometimes. I can change my body temperature, alter my appearance, and—" He paused, looking uncertain. "I can communicate across great distances, but only with others of my kind." "Have you tried to communicate with your people?" Ember's scales shifted to a darker blue, a color Sarah had learned indicated sadness. "Every night since memories returned. But there is only silence. I think I truly am alone." Sarah felt her heart break for him. She had known loneliness, but she couldn't imagine being the only human in a world of aliens, completely cut off from her own species. "You're not alone," she said firmly. "You have me." Ember's scales brightened and he touched her hand with the tip of one wing. "Yes, I have Sarah. But Sarah, you must understand I am growing beyond what this world can provide. My body needs elements that do not exist naturally on Earth. My mind needs stimulation that only my own kind can provide." The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You're saying you need to leave?" "I am saying I will die if I stay," Ember corrected gently. "Not today, not tomorrow, but within a year, perhaps less. My body is already beginning to reject this atmosphere, this food, this environment." Sarah felt tears starting again. "But where would you go? You said there's no answer when you call out." "There is possibility," Ember said slowly. "If I can grow strong enough, if I can develop my abilities fully, I might be able to send stronger signal." But it would require going to a place with less atmospheric interference. You mean high altitude? Very high. Mountain peak, perhaps, or... Ember looked at her meaningfully. Or if I could fly high enough. Sarah looked out at the empty parking lot, then back at Ember. You still haven't tried to fly. Was too dangerous before. Too many people watching. But Sarah, I think it's time. That night, in the abandoned lot behind the warehouse, Sarah watched Ember prepare for his first real attempt at flight. He had grown considerably over the past few weeks, stress seeming to accelerate his development. He was now nearly as large as Sarah herself, with a wingspan that was truly impressive when fully extended. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked, suddenly terrified that he would fly away and never come back. Ember seemed to sense her fear. I will not leave you, Sarah, not like this. We face this together, yes? Sarah nodded, though her throat was tight with emotion. Ember stretched his wings fully, the membrane between the bones catching the moonlight like stained glass. He crouched low, powerful muscles bunching in his legs, and then pushed off from the ground with a force that surprised Sarah. For a moment he hung in the air, wings beating frantically. Then something seemed to click, and suddenly he was soaring with grace and power that took Sarah's breath away. He circled the lot once, twice, his movements becoming more confident with each pass. When he landed beside her, his scales were glowing brighter than Sarah had ever seen them. It feels right, he said, breathing hard but clearly exhilarated, like remembering how to breathe. But as Sarah watched Ember's joy at finally being able to fly, she realized their time together was running out faster than she had feared. He was becoming what he was always meant to be, and what he was meant to be was something far beyond what Earth could contain. Tomorrow night, Ember said, as if reading her thoughts. I try to send signal. From highest point I can reach. If my people still exist, if they are looking for me, this may be only chance. Sarah nodded, trying to be brave for him even though her heart was breaking. What do you need me to do? Be there, Ember said simply. Whatever happens, I need Sarah to be there. As they settled down to sleep in the car that night, Sarah realized that tomorrow might be the last night she would ever spend with the creature who had become the most important thing in her life. But she also knew she would do whatever it took to help him find his way home, even if it meant losing him forever. The highest peak Sarah could drive to was Mount Wilson, 3 hours north of the city. They made the journey in silence, both understanding that this night would change everything. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel as they climbed the winding mountain roads, while Ember sat in the passenger seat, his scales flickering with nervous energy. Sarah had used the last of their money to fill the gas tank and buy supplies. If this didn't work, she had no idea what they would do next. But she tried not to think about that. Tonight was about giving Ember his best chance at contacting his people. They reached the summit just as the sun was setting. The parking area was empty except for their car, and the view stretched endlessly in all directions. The city lights twinkled far below, while above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. This is perfect, Ember said, stepping out of the car and immediately spreading his wings. At this altitude, the air was thinner and cleaner, and Sarah could see his scales begin to glow more brightly in response. How does this work? Sarah asked, setting up the camping chairs she had bought. The communication, I mean. Ember tilted his head, considering how to explain. Is like singing, but not with voice. Is singing with mind, with essence of what I am. My people, we are all connected by what you might call psychic frequency. When young ones are lost, elders listen always for their song. And you think they're still listening for yours? Hope, Ember said simply. After so long is all I have left. As full darkness fell, Ember positioned himself at the highest point of the summit, a rocky outcropping that jutted up above the tree line. Sarah watched from her chair as he closed his eyes and began to concentrate. At first, nothing visible happened. Then slowly, Ember's scales began to glow more intensely. The light started as his usual soft blue, but gradually shifted through spectrum Sarah had never seen before. Deep purples, brilliant golds, flashes of silver that seemed to contain starlight. The air around Ember began to shimmer, and Sarah felt a strange tingling sensation, as if the atmosphere itself was vibrating. Then she heard it, or rather felt it, a sound that wasn't quite a sound, more like music that bypassed her ears and went straight to her soul. Ember's song was beautiful beyond description. It contained loneliness and hope, love, and loss. The essence of a being calling out across impossible distances to find others of his kind. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the melody washed over her, understanding without words everything that Ember was trying to say. For an hour, he maintained the signal, his glow growing brighter and more intense with each passing minute. Sarah began to worry that he was pushing himself too hard, that the effort might hurt him, but she didn't dare interrupt. Then, just as she was about to call out to him, something changed. The quality of light around Ember shifted subtly, and Sarah felt a new presence in the psychic space his song had created. It was faint at first, like a whisper across vast distances, but it was definitely there. Someone was answering. Ember's posture straightened, and his scales blazed with joy. The song became more complex, a conversation now instead of a monologue. Sarah watched in wonder as colors she had no names for played across Ember's form, and the air itself seemed to dance with energy. The communication lasted for nearly another hour, during which Sarah sat mesmerized by the beautiful alien exchange. She couldn't understand the content, but she could feel the emotions: surprise, relief, urgency, and underneath it all, a deep, abiding love. When it finally ended, Ember collapsed onto the rock, his scales dim and his breathing labored. Sarah rushed to his side, cradling his large head in her lap. "Are you okay? Did it work?" Ember's eyes opened slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with a mixture of joy and sorrow that broke Sarah's heart. "They came for me," he whispered. "My people, they never stopped looking. Ship is coming, but—" He paused, struggling to continue. "Sarah, they are dying." "What do you mean?" "My people, the Draconi, we are ancient race, but we are ending. We have lived so long, explored so much, that we have forgotten how to hope for future. We stopped having younglings centuries ago. I was among the last to be born." Sarah felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "So there aren't many of you left?" "Less than hundreds scattered across galaxy. When ship crashed and I was lost, my clan mourned me as dead. They say my signal tonight is first time in decades any of them felt true joy." Ember struggled to sit up, his eyes bright despite his exhaustion. "They are coming for me, Sarah, but more than that, they want to meet you." "Me? Why?" "Because you saved me. Because you gave me something they thought was lost forever. You gave me childhood, love, family. You showed me what it means to care for another being without thought of reward or gain. My people, we had forgotten these things." Sarah felt overwhelmed. "When will they be here?" 3 days, Ember said. "Ship is already traveling using faster-than-light systems. They will land here on this mountain in 3 days, and then you'll leave with them." It wasn't a question, but Ember answered anyway. "Yes, I must. Without proper environment, proper nutrients, I will die within months." "But Sarah—" He touched her hand with the tip of his wing. "They want to offer you something." "What kind of something?" "Choice. You could come with us if you wanted. They have technology that could adapt your body to survive on our worlds, let you live among stars, or if you prefer to stay here, they will ensure you never want for anything. They will give you resources to build life you deserve." Sarah stared at him, mind reeling. "Come with you? To space? Yes, my people are dying, but you have shown them something they had lost. Hope, compassion, the ability to nurture and love. They think you could help them remember how to live again, not just exist." The magnitude of the choice ahead of her was staggering. Stay on Earth with unimaginable wealth, or leave everything she had ever known to live among aliens among the stars. But as she looked into Ember's hopeful eyes, Sarah realized the choice wasn't really about Earth versus space, wealth versus adventure. It was about family. Ember was the first being who had ever needed her, who had ever loved her unconditionally. How could she let him go alone into a future where his own people were dying? 3 days, she said finally. 3 days, Ember agreed. "And Sarah, whatever you choose, I want you to know, you saved me in every way that matters. You gave me life, love, and hope. No matter what happens, you will always be my family." As they sat together on the mountain peak under the alien stars, Sarah realized that her life as a struggling waitress was ending. In 3 days, everything would change. The only question was whether she was brave enough to follow her heart into the unknown. The ship arrived exactly when Ember said it would, descending from the star-filled sky like a falling piece of night itself. Sarah had never imagined anything so beautiful or so alien. It was sleek and dark, covered in the same patterns that sometimes appeared on Ember's scales when he was communicating, and it landed on the mountain peak without making a sound. Sarah stood beside Ember, her small backpack containing everything she owned slung over her shoulder. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of preparation and impossible decisions. But in the end, the choice had been easier than she expected. She couldn't let Ember face a dying species alone, not when she had the power to help. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss and 3 figures emerged. They were clearly the same species as Ember, but ancient in a way that made Sarah's breath catch. Their scales were more muted, their wings edged with silver, and their eyes held depths of knowledge and sorrow that spoke of centuries of existence. The eldest approached them, moving with careful dignity. When he spoke, his voice was like Ember's but deeper, resonating with authority and wisdom. "Young one," he said to Ember, and even speaking English, there was music in his words. "You have grown well despite your trials." "Elder Thyron," Ember replied, bowing his head respectfully. "I present Sarah Martinez, the human who saved my life." Elder Thyron turned his ancient gaze to Sarah, and she felt as though he was seeing not just her, but everything she had ever done, every choice she had ever made. "Sarah Martinez," he said slowly, as if tasting her name, "you have done something remarkable. You took in an alien child with no thought of reward or recognition. You fed him when you could barely feed yourself. You protected him when it cost you everything. You loved him when you had no reason to believe he could love you back." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," Elder Thyron said firmly. "That is precisely what makes this extraordinary. You believe this is what anyone would do, but in our centuries of observing species across the galaxy, we have learned that such selfless compassion is exceedingly rare. Most beings, when faced with the unknown, respond with fear or greed. You responded with love." Another elder stepped forward, her scales bearing patterns Sarah had never seen on Ember. "We are Draconi," she said. "For 3,000 years we have traveled among the stars, studying, learning, cataloging the wonders of the universe. But in all our learning we forgot how to live. We forgot what it meant to hope, to nurture, to see potential instead of just data. Our young one's survival is miraculous," the third elder added. "But more miraculous is what you taught him. Through your care he learned joy. Through your protection he learned trust. Through your love he learned that life has meaning beyond mere existence." Elder Thyron stepped closer to Sarah. "Our species is ending, human Sarah. We have perhaps 50 years before the last of us passes into memory. We had accepted this as inevitable, the natural conclusion to a race that had accomplished everything it set out to accomplish. But Ember changed that," Sarah said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Yes. His signal 3 nights ago contained something we had not felt in decades, pure joy. The happiness of a being who has been loved and who loves in return. It reminded us of what we had lost, what we had forgotten was possible." Ember stepped closer to Sarah, his scales bright with emotion. "Sarah, my people don't just want to thank you. They want to learn from you. They want to understand how humans create bonds so strong that they will sacrifice everything for another's well-being. And," Elder Thyron continued, "we want to offer something in return. If you come with us, we can extend your life to match ours. You can see wonders beyond imagination, visit worlds where the very air sings with music, witness the birth and death of stars. But more than that, you can help us learn to hope again." Sarah looked at the 3 ancient beings, then at Ember, whose young eyes were bright with anticipation and love. "What would I do? Among your people, I mean." "You would teach," the female elder said. "You would show us how to see the universe through eyes that find wonder instead of just data. You would help us remember what it means to live instead of merely exist. And," Ember added softly, "you would be my family still, the first family our people have had in centuries." Sarah felt tears sliding down her cheeks. 6 months ago, she had been a lonely waitress in a dead-end job, convinced that no one would ever need her for anything important. Now she was being offered the chance to save an entire species. "Will it work?" she asked. "Can you really learn to hope again?" Elder Thyron's scale shifted to a lighter blue, the first sign of anything resembling happiness Sarah had seen from any of them. "You have already begun the process. 3 days ago, when young Ember's signal reached us, something awakened in our people that we thought was dead forever. For the first time in decades, we are excited about the future. Sarah looked around the mountain peak where she had spent 3 days camping and thinking. Below them, Earth spread out in all its flawed, beautiful complexity. It was the only home she had ever known, but Ember was right. He was her family now. And families didn't abandon each other when times got hard. I have conditions, Sarah said, surprising herself with her own boldness. Elder Thyron tilted his head. Speak them. I want to come back to visit Earth sometimes. I want to make sure other humans know that there are good aliens out there, that not everyone from the stars means harm. Agreed, Elder Thyron said without hesitation. And I want Ember to be able to visit Earth too when he's older. This is part of his home now. Also agreed. Sarah took a deep breath. And I want to write about this someday. People should know that love can cross any boundary, even the ones between worlds. We would be honored to have our story told, Elder Thyron said. Sarah looked at Ember one last time. Are you sure about this? All of it? Ember's scales blazed with joy, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with all the love and gratitude she had ever hoped to hear from anyone. Sarah, you saved my life when I was lost and alone. Now let me help save yours. Let us explore the universe together. As Sarah walked toward the alien ship, leaving behind everything she had ever known, she realized that her story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. She had started as a waitress who rescued a strange creature from a dumpster. She was ending as the woman who helped an entire species remember how to hope. But most importantly, she was still exactly what she had always been, someone who chose love over fear, compassion over comfort, family over everything else. And as the ship rose silently into the star-filled sky, carrying her toward adventures beyond imagination, Sarah knew that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply choose to care for someone who needs you, even if that someone happens to be a dragon from the stars.